Hi everyone, my name is Dawn Friedman, and I've been working with kids and families for more than 30 years. As a preschool teacher, parent educator, family case manager, clinical counselor, and now as the owner and operator of Child Anxiety Support, where I help parents of anxious kids. FAQ stands for Frequently Asked Questions, and every episode I'm answering a listener question about child or teen anxiety. And this episode's question is, how can I involve siblings in our child anxiety management? This is a really good question because, first of all, siblings are always involved in whatever's going on with the anxious child. Our research shows us, and my experience has shown me, that siblings are often caught up in the same parenting pitfalls, which is to say that the inevitable patterns created by child anxiety and unintentionally perpetuated by parents are also perpetuated by siblings. And sometimes this is because we explicitly ask them to get involved, like help your brother do this thing, or let your sister go first, you know how scared she gets. But it also happens because siblings also care about siblings, and they will do things to protect their siblings. And sometimes sibling conflict also creates patterns of avoidance. Anxiety is challenging for the whole family. It does create conflict between parents, between siblings. There's a lot of tension. Worry feels like tension and irritability. And so it's no surprise that siblings get just as trapped as we parents do. So, how do we involve them? First thing we need to do is make sure we understand what family patterns are being perpetuated in our family. And the easiest way to do that is to go to my quiz, the Parenting Pitfalls Quiz, which is right on the front page of my site, childanxietysupport.com. Actually, if you do openbookparenting.com, it'll take you there more quickly. That's the URL I'm using now. But if you go there, you can take the quiz, and the quiz will highlight areas where you are likely to get stuck. The quiz is based on a couple of different assessments that we use clinically. Obviously, this is not a clinical measure, and it's just a descriptor of where we are likely to get stuck. And then your score will tell you how stuck you are. Hopefully, though, as you take the quiz, it's going to give you some insight into what's happening in your family. There's probably things you're doing that you didn't know were pitfalls. But as you're taking the quiz, I want you to notice where siblings are involved. Are there times that you are asking a sibling to step aside, to go first or go last, to give up the way they want something done in order to give in to another sibling's big demands? An example of this would be a child who went ahead and grabbed the red cup, and the one anxious kid goes, "No, that's my lucky red cup, and you know I have an exam later. Mom, tell them I have to have the red cup." It can be something like that. It can be something like letting that child kind of fend for themselves because you're so busy trying to manage the child that is struggling. You might start feeling guilty as you realize the way the parenting pitfalls have impacted other kids in the family. And I get that. I totally get that. Sometimes even the anticipation of guilt, or kind of knowing in the back of your head, this doesn't seem fair, makes us less likely to look at what's going on. So let me point out that guilt is a tool. It's only useful if it gives us insight into how things might be different. I'm not a big fan of guilt. I am a big fan of knowing what's going on, of saying, oh my gosh, I could be handling this better. What will I do to address that? But I'm not a big fan of, I'm the worst parent ever. It's not helpful. It's not helpful for you. It's not helpful for your child. And we're all doing things that we could do better, and we're constantly negotiating that. And that includes when we have an anxious child. It is an opportunity to learn. Back to the question. The first thing you do to get the other sibling involved is to get them uninvolved of the parenting pitfalls. Get them out of those parenting pitfalls. Figure out how you can get eyes on the sibling who is not struggling and figure out what kinds of supports they need. Siblings are always aware of each other and aware of when somebody is doing something better or worse, and aware when a parent is giving more or less attention. It's just the nature of siblinghood. You don't need to be fair. You just need to be as just as you can. And what's the difference there? Fair is everything's equal, everything matches. It's just not possible. Kids are all different, they have different needs. Just as people are getting more or less what they need as well as we are able to provide. And that's what we're going to look at here. Are people getting what they need? Does your non-anxious sibling need some attention around that? Have you ever talked to them not about their sibling's anxiety, as in, let's discuss your sibling's anxiety and discuss how we all feel about it? Because that's a little bit like gossip, but more like, you know that your sibling has tended to get more attention from us because of their anxiety, and I'm wondering how you're feeling about that. Are you feeling like your needs are getting met? Is there something you would like to see that would be different? Less about criticizing the sibling and more about sharing with me what's going on for you around that. Now, some siblings get a lot of pleasure out of being the helper. They like being able to help the family and help the sibling. They may have an identity as someone who does the thing, is super responsible, is super at hand. And that can be great, and it can also be a burden. So it's something to examine. If we ourselves had siblings growing up, we may consider, where were we in the sibling lineup? Were we someone who got a lot of attention or not enough attention? What was the conflict like between siblings, if there was any? What were the responsibilities with different siblings, and how did that feel to you? Just because it can be helpful to then look and say, am I enacting patterns that I learned as a child, and are these patterns still helpful for my family? Or are they a struggle? Am I reacting to things in such a way that I'm actually creating problems? Again, not about guilt and blame, more about insight. An example I'll give of this is a family that I was working with, and one of the parents had grown up with a sibling with a lot of difficult behaviors due to some unaddressed mental health issues. I don't really remember the diagnosis. I don't really remember the details. I just remember that this was a pattern in one of the parents' family of origins. Remember, we always use the name Joan on here since I don't know anyone named Joan and have yet to work with anybody named Joan, so we'll give this parent the name of Joan. Anyway, Joan was very, very concerned that she not reenact this pattern because she felt so shunted aside because of the incredible needs of this particular sibling. When this parent, Joan, looked at the way things were going with her anxious child and her other child, she realized she had mistakenly recreated that pattern, that the anxious child's anxiety had become so present for the family that everything else was shunted aside, including the sibling. So this parent, in an effort to make sure that any mental health needs that she was concerned about were being addressed, had actually created a very similar relationship. Even though her child did not have the kind of mental health issues that the other sibling had had in her family of origin, but Joan's outsized and understandable concern about it led her to be very entrenched in the parenting pitfalls, to the point that the anxious child sibling was getting shunted aside. This was something, once she realized, she was able to go and get her own therapy around it while we continued to work on how to help the anxious child deal with their anxiety and how to create a plan, an exposure plan, a confidence and competence plan to work on that. This is something that can happen too when we're doing work on being the parent that we are meant to be and that our children need. We may discover that we have some unaddressed issues from our family of origin, and that can inspire our own therapy and work. It's really important that gets its own space away from the work that we're doing with our anxious child. Certainly, it's a place that we can say, hey, this is going on for me, but the healing that we need to do is best done in its own space with a good therapist who understands what you've been through and understands the work that you are trying to do. So the best way to involve a sibling in the child anxiety management is to get the sibling out of the child anxiety management. Of course, family patterns of anxiety, they are already in it, but we're going to try to move them out of it. They can't help but be impacted even as we do the work, But again, one of our goals is that that child does not have to be a caretaker, does not have to make tons of allowances, is able to get their own needs met, even if their needs don't seem quite as big and as pressing as their anxious siblings' needs. That's all complicated stuff, but I have faith in you, and I know that you will be able to do it. Again, I encourage you, go take that Parenting Pitfalls quiz, see how entrenched your family is or isn't, and use that to guide you and inform you as you move forward in figuring out how to help your anxious child and how to help your family and even how to help yourself. If you have a question you'd like me to address on the podcast, head to my site, choose podcast up there in the menu, and there's a form to share your question. Maybe I'll address it on the next show. Thanks.